The palace of Umudike sat under the golden sunset, its red clay walls towering over the land. Servants moved like ghosts, careful not to make a sound. The air was heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Prince Chibueze stood by the open window, his gaze locked on the horizon. The weight of an entire kingdom pressed down on his shoulders. He had only 1 year to provide a male heir before his coronation. Now, with only 3 months left, he had no son. Behind him, the doors swung open. Chibueze, came the sharp voice of his mother, the Queen Dowager. He did not turn. He knew why she was here. "You waste time," she said, stepping forward. "The throne is slipping from your grasp, and yet you do nothing." Chibueze closed his eyes briefly. He had heard these words 100 times. "You have only daughters," she continued, voice laced with frustration. "The council will not crown a man who cannot produce a son. You must act." His hands curled into fists. "What do you suggest, mother?" "A second wife, or at least a concubine from the maidens in the palace. It is your duty." He turned then, his dark eyes burning. "My duty is to my family, to my wife Adanna. I will not betray her." The Queen Dowager's nostrils flared. "You call it betrayal. I call it saving your throne." Silence filled the chamber, thick and suffocating. Finally, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Chibueze, listen to me. Your father ruled because he was strong enough to make sacrifices. If he had been soft-hearted like you, our family would have lost the throne long ago. You must." "I said no," Chibueze cut in, his voice hard as stone. The Queen Dowager's lips pressed into a thin line. His will was unshaken. She exhaled sharply. "Then you leave me no choice." Chibueze watched as she turned and left. A strange feeling settled in his chest. His mother would not give up so easily, and that meant trouble. The Queen Dowager's footsteps echoed through the long corridors of the palace. She walked with purpose, her mind racing. If her son would not listen, then she would find someone he had to obey. She arrived at the chamber of Prime Minister Okonkwo, a man of wisdom, trusted by the late king. He was seated at his wooden desk, his long gray beard resting on his chest as he studied a scroll. "My queen," he greeted, rising to bow slightly. "You look troubled." The Queen Dowager sighed. "It is Chibueze. The boy refuses to see reason." Okonkwo's sharp eyes narrowed. "What has he done?" "He is throwing away his birthright," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "He has only 3 months left to provide a male heir, yet he clings to his wife like a foolish lover. I have begged him to take a second wife or a concubine, but he refuses." "Tell me, Prime Minister, does that sound like a man fit to rule?" Okonkwo was silent for a moment. Then he set his scroll down carefully. "A king must produce an heir," he admitted. "That is the law of Umudike. Without a son, the throne passes to the next family in line." "Exactly," the Queen Dowager's voice sharpened. "And yet my son stands firm. He refuses to bend." Okonkwo leaned forward. "And tell me, my queen, should a king bend?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "A king must never be ruled by fear or pressure. He must never be forced into a decision that goes against his heart," Okonkwo said. "Your son refuses to betray his wife. That is not weakness. That is strength." The Queen Dowager's lips parted slightly. "Your son is proving that he has the will of a king," Okonkwo continued. "If he were weak, he would have given in to your demands immediately, but he stands his ground. That is a rare quality, my queen." She sat back, digesting his words. "So you mean to tell me that his stubbornness is a good thing?" "It is more than good," Okonkwo said. "It is kingly." The Queen Dowager let out a slow breath. She had spent months trying to bend her son's will, not realizing that his refusal to bend was exactly what made him fit to rule. Still, doubt crept into her heart. "What if the gods do not bless him with a son?" she asked quietly. Okonkwo sighed. "Then it will be the gods' decision to make, not ours." Meanwhile, in the royal chambers, Adanna sat in silence. She knew what people whispered behind her back, that she was barren of sons, that she had failed as a queen. She looked at her 2 daughters, Neka and Oluchi, who slept peacefully beside her. Was it truly a woman's fault if she bore only daughters? The thought stung her chest. Just then, Chibueze entered. She stood immediately, her eyes searching his face. "What did she say this time?" Adanna asked. Chibueze sighed and pulled her into a gentle embrace. "The same thing she always says." Adanna swallowed. "I don't want to be the reason you lose your throne." He lifted her chin so that she met his gaze. "You are not the reason, Adanna, and I will not betray you for a throne. If the gods want me to be king, then I will be king. If not, then so be it." Adanna's eyes burned with tears. This man, her husband, stood against the world for her. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, "What if the gods do not want you to be king?" The tension in Umudike had grown thicker than Harmattan fog. The whispers had turned into open conversations. Everyone knew the law. No prince could be crowned king unless he had a male heir. But as the days passed and Chibueze remained firm in his decision, doubt spread like wildfire. The law was clear. The prince must produce a male heir before the coronation. However, if a woman was confirmed pregnant with a male child before the deadline, the coronation could still proceed. The chief priest of the kingdom had the final say. Only he could speak with the gods and confirm if a son was truly growing in the womb. And now, 3 months remained. The Queen Dowager stood before the Council of Elders, her frustration barely contained. "The boy is throwing away his destiny," she hissed. "He refuses to act, and the throne is slipping from his grasp." The elders exchanged glances. It was unheard of for a prince to defy this law. One of the elders, a wiry old man named Elder Ojiaku, cleared his throat. "My queen, we understand your concerns, but the law is clear. If within these last 3 months his wife or concubine is confirmed with a male child, then he can be crowned. But if not, the throne will pass to the next family in line." Another elder finished. The Queen Dowager's face tightened. She already knew this. That was why time was running out. "What if he still refuses?" she asked coldly. The elders were silent. Then Elder Ojiaku spoke again. "He is not fit to rule." The words stung her heart like a blade. For the first time, fear crept into her chest. Would her son truly lose everything just because of his love for one woman? In the royal chambers, Adanna sat in deep thought. 3 months, that was all that remained. And if she did not conceive a son, her husband would lose his birthright. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the herbal mixture on the table before her. The royal physician had prepared it, a fertility potion meant to strengthen her womb. She should drink it. She had to drink it. But what if it wasn't enough? What if, after everything, she still failed? Her heart clenched. Maybe if he took another woman, just once. No, she shut her eyes tightly. Chibueze had chosen her. He had refused to betray her. How could she be the one to betray him now? Her thoughts were interrupted when the doors opened and Chibueze stepped in. He looked at her with concern. "What is wrong?" Adanna hesitated. Then she whispered, "What if I fail you?" Chibueze walked up to her and held her face in his hands. "You could never fail me, Adanna." Tears welled in her eyes. "But what if I can't give you a son in time?" Chibueze was silent for a long moment. Then he exhaled. "Then we will leave, Adanna. We will take our daughters and go far away from here. Let the gods decide who will sit on that throne." Adanna's heart pounded. He meant it. He was willing to walk away from everything. But deep inside her, a storm of uncertainty raged. What if the gods had already made their decision? And what if that decision had been stolen from them long ago? The air in Umudike felt heavy. The kingdom waited for a sign, for an answer, for a prince's decision that refused to come. The royal court was restless. The people whispered. Time was running out. 2 months left. The Queen Dowager had grown desperate. She had pleaded, argued, even cried before Chibueze. But his answer remained the same. "I will not betray my wife." So now she waited for the chief priest. If time could not change Chibueze's mind, perhaps the gods would. The chief priest's warning. The chief priest of Umudike was an old, thin man with deep lines on his face, as though he carried the burden of secrets. He entered the Queen Dowager's chamber silently, his white robe brushing against the floor. "My queen," he greeted. She rose immediately. "I need your help." The chief priest said nothing, waiting. "My son's stubbornness will ruin us," she continued. "But there is still time. If a woman conceives a male heir before the coronation, the throne will be secured." The chief priest nodded. "That is the law of our ancestors." The Queen Dowager leaned forward. "Then you must convince my son. You must tell him that the gods demand it." For the first time, the old man's expression shifted. His sharp, knowing eyes met hers. "The gods do not rush their own plans, my queen. Perhaps the prince is right to wait." She frowned. "What are you saying?" The chief priest's voice lowered. I am saying the gods are watching. Something about his tone sent a shiver down her spine. Then may they act quickly, she whispered, because if my son does not have a son before the coronation, he will no longer be my son. He will be a nobody. The other family awaits. Deep within the palace, another man sat in silence. Obinna, the next in line for the throne. He had dreamed of power all his life, but he had never thought it would come to him like this. He stared at his wife, Nkiru, who was braiding their son's hair, their perfect son, the child that had secured his place as the next ruler. Nkiru, he called softly. She looked up, her hands pausing. Yes, my husband? Obinna hesitated. Does it not feel strange? What? That fate has suddenly smiled on us, he murmured. That Chibueze, a strong, determined Chibueze, will lose his birthright simply because he has no son. Nkiru's fingers tensed slightly around the braid. The gods work in mysterious ways, my love. Obinna studied her face. He had always believed in the gods, but now doubt lingered. Had fate truly chosen him, or was there something he did not know? The final month. As the final month approached, Adanna's body remained silent. No pregnancy, no sign. Chibueze prepared for the worst. He knew that when the day came, he would not fight for the throne. He would leave. But something about the chief priest's recent visits unsettled him. The old man had never pressured him to take another wife. He had simply watched, observed. And today he had said something strange. The gods are watching, and they will reveal the truth at the right time. A truth about what? Chibueze didn't know, but something deep inside him told him that the coronation day would change everything. The day of the coronation arrived. The palace courtyard overflowed with nobles, elders, warriors, and villagers. Drums pounded in slow, deliberate beats. The air smelled of burning incense. The gods were watching. Chibueze stood tall, his expression unreadable. He already knew his fate. He had prepared to leave the palace with Adanna and their daughters. The throne was no longer his. At the far end of the courtyard, Obinna stood with pride, dressed in royal robes. His wife Nkiru stood beside him, her hand resting on their son's shoulder. Their moment had come. Then the chief priest raised his staff. The crowd fell silent. The gods had made their choice. A deep hush settled over the palace. The elders leaned forward. The Queen Dowager squeezed her hands together. Adanna's heart pounded. The chief priest turned his gaze towards Obinna and Nkiru. Before we proceed, there is a truth that must be revealed. Murmurs spread through the crowd. On coronation day, Nkiru shifted slightly, but her face remained composed. The chief priest's voice rose. A great crime was committed in this palace many years ago. A sharp breeze swept through the air. A child was stolen. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Chibueze's body stiffened. Adanna gripped his hand. The chief priest turned toward Nkiru. His sharp eyes settled on her. Where did you get the child you call your son? Nkiru's fingers twitched. What kind of question is that? The old man stepped forward, his presence like a towering storm. Tell us, Nkiru, where did you get him? Obinna turned to his wife, confusion flashing across his face. Nkiru, what is he talking about? She swallowed. Her grip on the boy's shoulder tightened. He is our son. I carried him. I gave birth to him. You lie, the chief priest interrupted. The crowd gasped again. Obinna took a step back. Nkiru? The priest's voice rang out. That boy is the first son of Prince Chibueze. He is the heir to the throne. A stunned silence fell over the palace. Adanna staggered. Chibueze caught her before she could fall. What did he say? She whispered. The truth unraveled before them like a curse broken at last. The priest continued. When Adanna gave birth, she had twins, a boy and a girl. But the boy was stolen at birth and given to Nkiru. The girl was left behind. All eyes turned to Nkiru. Obinna's lips trembled. Nkiru, tell me it's not true. But Nkiru's silence was the answer. A cry of rage broke from Obinna's throat. He turned on his wife, his hands shaking. How could you do this? Tears filled Adanna's eyes. Her son. Her first son had been alive all along, right in the same palace. The young boy looked around, his innocent eyes filled with confusion. Mama, he whispered. Nkiru fell to her knees. She knew it was over. The chief priest raised his staff again. The gods tested Prince Chibueze. They watched him refuse temptation, remain faithful, and honor his own heart. And because he did not bend to pressure, his destiny has been returned to him. The Queen Dowager collapsed into her seat. She had spent years fearing that her son would lose the throne, only to realize that the gods had already secured it for him. Obinna and Kiru were stripped of all royal titles and banished in shame. The young boy, finally returned to his real parents, was crowned as the rightful prince. And as the crowd cheered, the drums beating louder than ever, the Queen Dowager looked at her son with new eyes. Her son was truly a king who had passed the greatest test of all.